I always believed that collecting rainwater in Arizona was a smart move, for sustainability, drought control, and basic survival. But apparently, in Sunnyside Estates, that practically makes you some kind of criminal mastermind. So imagine my shock when 4 police cars pulled up in front of my house because my neighbor let's just call her Karen, because, of course, decided my rainwater tank was part of some underground water smuggling operation. I guess the sight of a 500-gallon tank triggered her HOA defense mode. If you've ever lived next to someone who treats landscaping codes like they're holier than the Constitution, drop a comment. Hey, I need to know I'm not the only one out here. Right now, I'm recording this from my backyard where I can literally see her peeking through the blinds every 30 seconds like she's running a covert surveillance op. And trust me, that wasn't even the wildest part, because this story only spirals from here. Let me back up and explain how this suburban saga began. My name's Logan Hayes. I'm a 38-year-old landscape architect who specializes in sustainable urban design. About 6 months ago, I moved into Sunnyside Estates, Arizona, looking for a clean slate after my divorce, a quiet place where I could put my environmental skills to use and maybe find a little peace. From the outside, the neighborhood seemed perfect: well-kept homes, desert-friendly landscaping, and what looked like a functional homeowners association. Since my work is all about designing spaces that save resources, Arizona's constant drought made it the ideal place for me. Little did I know, I was stepping straight into a neighborhood battleground ruled by one ruthless hoe queen. The trouble started when I decided to install a rainwater harvesting system in my side yard. Arizona might be a desert, but when it rains, it pours, and it only made sense to capture that water. I followed every rule, researched the regulations, got permits from both the city and county, and even hired a certified contractor who specializes in sustainable systems. No shortcuts, no nonsense. This was a professionally installed 500-gallon collection tank with filtration and a small pump for my garden irrigation. Nothing extreme, and entirely legal thanks to Arizona's progressive water harvesting laws. The installation crew showed up early on a Thursday, and everything was going fine until a shadow loomed over the project. "That's quite the contraption you're putting in," came a voice laced with fake politeness. I turned to see a woman in her early 40s standing at the property line, arms crossed, designer sunglasses perched like a tiara on her head. That was my first run-in with Carol Whitfield, though the neighbors had already dubbed her a Karen behind her back, a nickname I'd soon realize was well-earned. She wore a perfectly maintained blonde bob, like it was a uniform requirement for hoe tyrants, and had the kind of disapproving glare that made you feel like you'd been caught burying a body instead of installing an eco-friendly water system. I smiled, reached out my hand, and introduced myself, explaining I was new in the neighborhood and setting up a rain harvesting system to help with water conservation. "I'm on the HOA board," she announced, ignoring my hand completely, "and I don't recall seeing an application for this installation come across my desk." Her tone made it crystal clear she believed herself to be the ultimate authority in Sunnyside Estates. Calmly, I pulled out my permits and showed them to her, pointing out that Arizona Revised Statute 9500.04 explicitly protects homeowners' rights to harvest rainwater. I also noted that the HOA bylaws I'd been given didn't ban water conservation systems, especially not those backed by state law. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she scanned the paperwork. She couldn't argue the legality, but her face said this wasn't over. "Well," she sniffed, handing the papers back like they were contaminated, "the HOA board will be reviewing this eyesore at our next meeting. Not everything that's technically legal belongs in our community." As she turned and left, a friendly voice called from the next yard, "Don't mind Hurricane Carol. She sweeps through here like clockwork, leaving chaos in her wake." That was Dave Johnson, a retired civil engineer in his late 60s who quickly became my closest ally in the neighborhood. He strolled over, admired the system's design, and even offered a couple of tips to the installation crew. As they worked, Dave filled me in on Carol's reputation. "She's ruled this place like a little fiefdom for 5 years," he said quietly. "Last year, the Williams family had to tear out their vegetable garden because it had disrupted the desert landscape aesthetic. The Garcas were fined $300 for painting their front door a shade of blue that wasn't on the approved color list even though you couldn't tell the difference. Dave's eyes narrowed as we watched Carol taking photos of my property from the sidewalk. "Watch yourself, son," he warned. "She's always on the hunt for her next target and looks like you're it." By late afternoon, the crew finished installing the sleek, modern 500-gallon tank, partially screened with desert plants to minimize its visual impact. As the workers packed up, Carol returned at this time with another HOA board member. "The HOA board will be discussing this eyesore at our next meeting," she repeated, extra loud so the neighbors could hear. I just smiled, thanked her for her concern, and gently reminded her again about Arizona's laws protecting rainwater harvesting. As they walked away, I heard her mutter, "We'll see about that." Dave, watering his native plant garden next door, caught my eye and shook his head. What I didn't know then was that Carol wasn't just annoyed as she saw my rain tank as the perfect excuse to flex her power and try to reassert her control. And what arrived in my mailbox the very next morning was only the start of a suburban nightmare I never signed up for. A certified letter. First thing Saturday morning, an urgent notice of an emergency home meeting. The meeting was scheduled for Monday evening to address my so-called unauthorized water collection system. I wasn't entirely shocked, but the speed of Carol's retaliation definitely caught me off guard. I called Dave, who had thankfully shared his number just in case, and he filled me in on what he'd picked up through the neighborhood grapevine. Turns out, Carol Whitfield wasn't your typical HOA busybody. She was a divorced, former corporate manager who'd been laid off about 5 years ago. Since then, she'd been channeling all that pent-up executive energy into micromanaging Sunnyside Estates. But it wasn't just boredom or control issues fueling her obsession. She's planning to run for city council next year, Dave told me, and she's using this HOA as her personal political launching pad. Sunnyside is supposed to be her model neighborhood for the campaign. "And your rain tank?" he added dryly, "doesn't exactly fit into the picture-perfect vision." I spent the weekend getting ready for the showdown. I gathered all my permits, printed out copies of relevant Arizona statutes, and took photos of other eco-friendly features around the neighborhood that had been left untouched. When Monday evening arrived, I walked into the community center's conference room and was surprised to see how packed it was. Carol had clearly rallied her supporters, but I also spotted several curious neighbors who seemed unsure which side to take. Richard Thompson, the HOA president, a 71-year-old retired attorney with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, called the meeting to order. His weary expression made it obvious this wasn't his first time mediating a petty neighborhood dispute. "We're here to address a concern raised by board member Carol Whitfield regarding a recently installed water collection system at the Hayes residence," he began diplomatically. That's when I realized just how far Carol was willing to go. She'd prepared a full PowerPoint presentation, which should have been my first red flag that this was no casual complaint. The slide showed a series of deliberately unflattering photos of my rain tank, taken from every possible angle around my property, and a few shots that could only have come from someone trespassing in my backyard. "As you can all see," Carol declared, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room, "this unsightly industrial structure disrupts the visual harmony of our neighborhood. On top of that, standing water can attract mosquitoes and pose a health risk to our families." She clicked through slide after slide, each photo looking worse than the last. Some even seemed edited to make the tank appear larger and more intrusive than it actually was. "Our community guidelines clearly state that all exterior modifications must preserve the established desert aesthetic of Sunnyside Estates," she went on, pausing dramatically on one particularly distorted image. "And this," she declared, "clearly does not." When it was finally my turn to speak, I calmly stepped forward with my documents in hand. I laid out the permits, explained the environmental benefits, and pointed out how the system was partially screened by native desert plants. Arizona Revised Statute 9500.04 specifically protects a homeowner's right to harvest rainwater, I said, handing copies of the statute to each board member. The state actively encourages these systems as a drought management strategy. I also clarified that the tank was fitted with certified mosquito screens, was professionally installed, and actually helped reduce standing water on my property compared to traditional irrigation setups. As I spoke, I noticed a few heads in the crowd nodding, particularly among younger homeowners. A woman named Linda Martinez, whose native plant garden I'd often admired, raised her hand. "I think it's great to see new residents bringing sustainable ideas into our community," she said. "We live in a desert. Water conservation should be celebrated, not punished." Richard, clearly trying to steer things toward a peaceful resolution, proposed a compromise. "Perhaps we can require additional landscaping to further screen the tank from view," he suggested. I was just about to agree when Carol made her next move. With a satisfied smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes, she spoke up. "Actually," she announced, "I've already drafted an amendment to our community bylaws addressing water collection systems." And with that, she began handing out copies of a clearly pre-prepared document. She had clearly been planning this for a while. "As you'll notice," Carol announced smugly, "we've already gathered the necessary proxy votes from homeowners who couldn't attend tonight." My stomach dropped as I scanned the document she distributed. The proposed amendment required that all water collection systems be installed entirely underground and remain completely hidden from view from any angle. Requirements so extreme and expensive, they might as well have outlawed rainwater harvesting altogether. Somehow, Carol had managed to collect enough proxy votes ahead of the meeting to guarantee the amendment would pass. It was obvious now this had been her plan from the start. By the time the meeting adjourned, I'd officially been given 14 days to comply with the new rule, or face a fine of $100 for every day I remained in violation. As I made my way to my car, feeling drained and defeated, Linda caught up with me in the parking lot. "You do realize this isn't really about your rain tank, right?" she murmured, quickly glancing around to be sure no one was listening. "Carol's running for city council next year. She wants this neighborhood to look flawless for her campaign materials," she added, squeezing my arm in a gesture of solidarity. "She's pulled this before with anyone who doesn't fit into her perfect little vision." Last year, the Rodriguez family had to take down their basketball hoop because it was disrupting the community aesthetic. They moved out a month later. That's when it truly hit me, this wasn't just about a water tank. This was about control. And Carol had just made her first aggressive move. But I wasn't about to let myself get pushed out of my own home without a fight, especially not over something as practical and responsible as a rain collection system. If Carol wanted a battle, then a battle she'd get. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of disbelief, frustration, and steadily growing anger. I hadn't moved to Sunnyside Estates for this. I came for a fresh start, not to butt heads with a neighborhood tyrant with political ambitions. At first, the idea of giving in crossed my mind. Just go with it, avoid conflict, keep the peace. After all, I'd only been living there for 3 months. But the longer I thought about it, the stronger my resolve became. This wasn't just about a water tank anymore. It was about standing up to bullying, to petty power plays, and arbitrary rules dressed up as community standards. I picked up the phone and called the contractor who'd installed my system to ask for a quote on relocating the tank underground, hidden from view in every direction, exactly as the new HOA amendment demanded. His response was exactly what I expected. "That's basically impossible," he told me. "Not unless you're ready to spend at least $15,000 on a full redesign." Even if I wanted to comply, the contractor confirmed what I already suspected: rebuilding the system underground would be next to impossible without spending over $15,000, and even then, it would still require above-ground access points for maintenance. It was obvious now that the amendment had been designed specifically to force me to remove the tank altogether. Luckily, my background in landscape architecture gave me an unexpected advantage. I threw myself into researching HOA bylaws and Arizona statutes governing homeowners associations. That's when I discovered something interesting. Amendments like the one Carol had pushed through required advance notice to all homeowners and had to follow strict procedural rules. Carol's suspiciously swift collection of proxy votes, gathered before the so-called emergency meeting was even announced, didn't add up. I started keeping detailed notes of every interaction, saving every email, and photographing my property daily to document a clear timeline. What began as a defensive effort quickly turned into a strategic counteroffensive. Dave invited me over for coffee, and what I thought would be a casual gripe session turned out to be my initiation into Sunnyside Estates' unofficial resistance. A small, quietly organized group of homeowners who had spent years documenting Carol's authoritarian tactics. Dave's living room became our headquarters, carefully positioned out of Carol's line of sight. Linda Martinez was there too, arriving with a thick folder of notes detailing Carol's previous victories over other residents. "She's calculated," Linda explained, laying out photos across Dave's coffee table. "She targets anything that doesn't fit into her carefully curated aesthetic, anything that might ruin her perfect backdrop for those campaign mailers she's been planning." The photos revealed a disturbing pattern: homes with creative landscaping, colorful front doors, children's play sets, or sustainable features had all been forced to remove them over the past 3 years. It started with minor things, garden ornaments and paint colors, but Carol had grown bolder. My rain tank was her most ambitious target yet, likely because it was explicitly protected by state law. The most damning discovery came when Dave casually took me on a stroll past Carol's own backyard. Through the slats in her fence, we spotted sprinklers running full blast in the heat of the afternoon, a direct violation of the county's drought restrictions. The hypocrisy was staggering. I borrowed Dave's professional camera with a telephoto lens, and over the next 3 days, quietly documented Carol's ongoing water violations. Through public records, we uncovered even more. 2 years earlier, Carol had personally derailed a proposed neighborhood-wide xeriscaping initiative, claiming it would harm the lush, cultivated look of Sunnyside Estates. Meanwhile, the HOA's water bills for common areas had jumped by 30% during her time on the board. As we pieced it together, a clear pattern emerged. Carol had systematically worked to eliminate environmentally friendly modifications throughout the neighborhood, all while maintaining her own water-hungry yard. "She's not just anti-rain tank," Dave said grimly as we reviewed the evidence. "She's anti-anything that doesn't fit her 1950s suburban fantasy. Green lawns, white picket fences, roses, and not a single solar panel in sight, all for some contrived image of a traditional values while the state battles its worst drought in half a century." Our little underground network grew again when Jennifer Williams, a sharp-witted real estate attorney who'd recently moved in, introduced herself after overhearing a conversation between me and Linda at the coffee shop. "I've been combing through the HOA documents," Jennifer said, spreading a stack of papers across the cafe-copyright table, "and Carol broke at least 3 procedural rules pushing that amendment through." According to Jennifer, proper notice hadn't been given to all homeowners. Proxy votes must be collected after a meeting is officially announced, not before, and any amendment affecting property rights required a supermajority vote, which Carol didn't have. Jennifer's calm, precise analysis gave me hope that we had a legitimate path to fight this through official channels. With her help, I drafted a formal challenge to the amendment based on these violations and submitted it directly to Richard, the HOA president. Richard called me the next day, his voice low and cautious, as if someone might be listening. "Logan, I got your letter," he said, "and you raise some valid concerns the board will need to review." Truthfully, I never agreed with how this amendment was handled. "But Carol, a broken bar, she has a lot of sway with certain board members," he sighed, weariness in his voice. "Give me a little time to sort through this. And, between you and me, be careful. Carol doesn't take well to being challenged." His warning proved all too accurate. That very afternoon, I pulled into my driveway to find Carol and another board member standing in front of my home, measuring and taking photos of my property. "Excuse me," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "but you're trespassing." Carol didn't even flinch. "We're documenting ongoing violations," she said curtly, making no move to leave. "The 14-day compliance period is still in effect." I stood my ground, pulling out my phone. "Unless you have a warrant or my written permission, you need to leave my property immediately." Carol's eyes narrowed as she met my gaze. Carol's eyes flicked to my phone, clearly wondering if I was recording. Her voice dropped to a cold, threatening whisper. "You really should have done your homework before moving here," she said. Some people just don't belong in Sunnyside Estates. As they finally turned to leave, something caught my eye: a movement in the bushes along the side of my house. A young man in his mid-20s was crouched there, snapping additional photos from another angle. "Who's that?" I demanded. Carol offered no reply, but later that evening, Dave confirmed what I already suspected. It was Jeremy Whitfield, Carol's son, apparently roped into her harassment campaign. I was still seething when a text came through from Linda. She did this before. "Check your water meter." Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped outside, not knowing I was about to uncover something that would change the entire course of this battle. Under the beam of my light, the water meter immediately looked a broken bar off. I wasn't an expert on utility equipment, but the longer I studied it, the more obvious it became. Tiny scratches surrounded the faceplate, and the tamper seal showed signs of being disturbed, faint marks that suggested someone had pried at it. Someone had been messing with it. I snapped dozens of photos from every possible angle, documenting every scratch and sign of tampering. First thing the next morning, I drove straight to the hardware store and bought a full home security system: motion-activated cameras, night vision, the works. By the end of the day, my property was under 24-hour surveillance, with special focus on the water meter and rain collection system. I didn't have to wait long for results. At 2:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from one of the cameras. The night vision footage clearly showed Jeremy Whitfield kneeling beside my meter box, using tools to adjust something inside. I immediately reported the incident to the water utility company. They sent an inspector out within hours, and what he found was even worse than I imagined. The inspector confirmed that someone had tampered with the meter, deliberately manipulating it to display higher water usage than I was actually consuming. But what shocked him most wasn't the tampering itself, it was the professional, calculated way it had been done. "This isn't some kid messing around," the inspector said, pointing out how the meter's calibration had been subtly altered. "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They rigged it to show about 30% more consumption. I don't usually see this kind of precision outside of water theft operations during drought emergencies." He filed a formal report, took his own photographs for evidence, and reset the meter with a new tamper evidence seal. Before he left, he gave me a grave look. "I've worked for this utility company for 23 years, he confided. "And this kind of deliberate, skilled manipulation is rare, the sort of thing you typically see in organized theft cases, not petty neighborhood disputes." His words drove the gravity of the situation home. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. This was calculated, criminal fraud, aimed at making me look like a water-wasting lawbreaker during one of the worst droughts on record. Had Carol's plan worked, I could have faced massive fines and public disgrace as the very type of person she was pretending to protect the neighborhood from. Armed with the security footage and the official utility company report, I confronted Carol directly the very next afternoon. She was in her front yard, casually watering a bed of non-native flowers, another blatant violation of the same drought restrictions she so ruthlessly enforced against others. "I have video of your son tampering with my water meter," I said evenly, holding up my phone. The utility company filed an official report. "I'm giving you one chance, Carol, back off, or I take this to the authorities." For a moment, Carol's face went pale before she managed to regain her composure. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied icily. "That video is obviously doctored. My son would never do such a thing." She turned her back on me, but not before delivering a final warning. "Be careful about making false accusations, Mr. Hayes. Defamation is a serious matter." I walked away, knowing that the battle lines had now been drawn more sharply than ever. The neighborhood began openly taking sides. My security system had revealed just how far Carol was willing to go, and many residents were disturbed by the escalation. A few braver neighbors quietly showed their support. Linda brought over a homemade pie. Dave helped reinforce the rain tank's foundation. Jennifer continued offering legal advice on challenging the whole amendment. Others, still wary of Carol's influence, kept their distance. I started noticing Carol's car circling my block at strange hours. Jeremy's motorcycle would sometimes slow as it passed my driveway, The feeling of being watched was constant. Carol's attacks went beyond harassment as she launched a social offensive as well. Rumors began circulating that I was stealing water from the municipal supply and using my security cameras to spy on neighbors. Some of the older residents started giving me wary, suspicious looks, despite my efforts to explain that my cameras pointed only at my own property. Fortunately, my background in environmental design gave me an edge. Using my expertise in water conservation systems, I installed a precise monitoring system that recorded exactly how much rainwater was collected and how much was used in my irrigation setup. I kept meticulous logs, clearly proving that my garden was sustained solely by harvested rainwater. To strengthen my credibility, I invited several respected members of the community, including a local master gardener and a retired environmental science professor, to tour my system. Their professional endorsements carried weight. "This is exactly the kind of innovation our desert community needs," the professor declared during his visit, his voice deliberately loud enough for nearby neighbors working in their yards to hear. "If more homes used systems like this, we could cut municipal water use by 20% during drought periods." The confrontation reached a tipping point after a rare, heavy rainstorm filled my collection tank to capacity. The beauty of rainwater harvesting is that it allows you to store water for dry spells, and that's exactly what I did. I connected the tank to a drip irrigation system, keeping my desert-adapted garden thriving without drawing a drop from the municipal supply. One afternoon, while working from home, I spotted Carol standing across the street, openly taking notes as my irrigation system operated. I knew what she was thinking, and I should have anticipated her next move, but I underestimated the scale of her response. The following day, at exactly 2:23 p.m., 4 police cars rolled up to my house, lights flashing. Officers exited their vehicles cautiously, while Carol stood in her driveway, arms crossed and wearing a look of smug satisfaction. A utility company truck parked right behind them. "You Logan Hayes?" asked the lead officer, a stern-faced woman with one hand resting near her belt. "When I confirmed my identity," she continued, "we've received a report alleging that you're operating an illegal water grid and stealing municipal water during drought restrictions. We need to inspect your property." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Officer, I have all the necessary permits for my rainwater harvesting system. I'm not using municipal water, I only collected rainwater for irrigation. I'd be happy to show you everything." The next 30 minutes were spent carefully walking the officers and utility representative through my system. I showed them permits, demonstrated how the rainwater was collected and filtered, and explained how the separate irrigation network functioned. The utility tech examined it with growing professional interest, even mentioning a rebate program for similar setups. By the end of the inspection, it was clear their irritation was no longer directed at me. "Sorry for the trouble, Mr. Hayes," the lead officer said as she returned my paperwork. "Your system is entirely legal and frankly, pretty impressive." I couldn't help myself. "May I ask who reported me?" She hesitated, then answered carefully. "The call came from a Carol Whitfield. She alleged you were stealing water and operating an illegal grid." Given the nature of the complaint, we had to investigate. As the police cars drove away, I saw Carol's expression shift from smug satisfaction to something I hadn't seen from her before, a fear. One of the officers even stopped by her house on the way out. I couldn't hear what was said, but whatever it was, it left an impression. That night, I received an email from Richard, the HOA president. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Carol's actions have gone too far." The tide was finally turning, but I had no illusions. I still didn't know how Carol would react when truly cornered. At the emergency home meeting the following day, the atmosphere was nothing like the last one. The room was packed, the tension palpable. This time, the mood in the room was different, tense, with a current of barely contained anger rippling through the gathered homeowners. Richard called the meeting to order with a gravity I hadn't seen from him before. "We're here to address recent events that have brought unwanted attention to our community," he began, his voice steady, "and which may constitute harassment against one of our residents." He made brief eye contact with me as he spoke, and I noticed, to my surprise, Officer Jackson from the previous day's police visit sitting quietly in the back row. She had stopped by my house that morning for a follow-up, revealing something I hadn't known. The department had received multiple false reports originating from Carol's address over the past year. Filing false police reports is a serious offense, she'd explained at my door. Miss Whitfield may face charges if this continues. Now, she was observing the meeting with calm, professional interest, occasionally jotting notes as the discussion unfolded. Richard proceeded to summarize the events for the assembled residents. Carol's obsessive targeting of my rain tank, the procedurally questionable HOA amendment she'd pushed through, and finally, the false police report accusing me of water theft. The board has received numerous messages from concerned residents following yesterday's incident, he said, shuffling through a stack of printed emails. Many of you have expressed that this isn't the first time similar actions have been taken against homeowners whose property modifications didn't align with a broken bar certain aesthetic visions. He chose his words carefully, but the message was clear. Something had shifted in the community. For the first time, people seemed ready to speak openly. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their own stories about Carol. The Patils described how she'd harassed them over their holiday decorations. The Delgados recounted weeks of petty complaints about their children's backyard swing set. The Richardsons, a quiet couple who had moved away several months earlier, had left after enduring relentless nitpicking about their zero-scaped front yard. A clear pattern emerged through these testimonies. Carol wasn't just enforcing HOA regulations, she was selectively targeting homeowners whose choices didn't fit her personal vision for the neighborhood, a vision she intended to parade as the centerpiece of her upcoming political campaign. Then Linda Martinez stepped forward, holding a folder thick with photographs. She spread them out on the table for all to see. Images of Carol taking pictures of various homes, sometimes posing herself in front of what were clearly her preferred, approved properties. In several of the photos, Carol stood smiling beside homes with manicured lawns and decorative fountains, while other pictures captured her scowling at properties that deviated from her ideal. She's building her platform on this, Linda said, her voice calm but firm. These photos are staged campaign materials. She's trying to create a narrative where she alone is preserving the integrity of our neighborhood, while quietly pushing out anyone who doesn't match her brochure-ready version of Sunnyside Estates. She's building her campaign on the back of forced conformity, Linda explained. Any house that doesn't fit her aesthetic vision gets targeted until it's either altered or the owners leave. Richard, now visibly troubled, called for a formal vote to rescind the recently passed water tank amendment, citing procedural violations. The measure passed overwhelmingly. Only Carol and two of her staunchest allies voted against it. Next, Richard proposed the formation of a neighborhood committee tasked with reviewing and updating all HOA bylaws, with a focus on transparency and fairness. We need to ensure that community standards are applied consistently, he stated firmly. Carol's response was immediate and desperate. I have only ever acted to protect property values and maintain standards, she protested, her voice rising with each word. This neighborhood was declining before I joined the board. Look at what I've accomplished. We're the envy of surrounding communities. When that failed to sway the room, she switched tactics. Her voice dropped to a cold, threatening tone. If you allow unsightly modifications like that industrial water tank, what's next? Solar panels covering every roof, vegetable gardens in the front yards, children's toys scattered everywhere, property values will plummet. For a long, uncomfortable moment, the room was silent. Then, from the back, a single chuckle broke the tension. Laughter spread through the room, growing until most of the gathered homeowners were either smiling or openly laughing. Carol's imagined apocalypse of solar energy, vegetable gardens, and plain children had inadvertently revealed just how out of touch her priorities were with the community's evolving values. The meeting concluded with two major outcomes. The water tank amendment was officially repealed, and I was invited to join the newly formed bylaws review committee, alongside Linda, Jennifer, and several other residents. As we filed out of the community center, a palpable sense of relief filled the air, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. In the parking lot, Officer Jackson approached me. Good outcome, she said with a professional nod. But keep your security system active and document everything. People can get unpredictable when they feel cornered. Her warning proved prophetic. The very next morning, I found my rain tank had been vandalized, the connecting hose was slashed, and the main valve damaged. Someone had smeared mud over my security camera, rendering most of the footage useless. All I could make out was a shadowy figure moving through my yard. The damage was repairable, but the message was unmistakable. Carol wasn't backing down. I spent the day repairing the system, installing additional cameras with better vantage points, backup power supplies, and reinforcing every vulnerable section of the setup. Dave came over to help, bringing stronger materials and his practical engineering know-how. "She's escalating because she's losing control," he observed grimly as we worked. "Be extra vigilant now." Later that afternoon, an anonymous note appeared in my mailbox. Its simple, threatening message sent a chill down my spine. "Water thieves don't belong here." I called Officer Jackson immediately. She arrived within the hour, collected the note as evidence, and promised increased patrols. "We're taking this seriously," she assured me. "Threats and vandalism aren't HOA issues, they're criminal matters." As she was leaving, something caught my eye in the front garden. A small decorative smart irrigation sensor, embedded in the soil, pointed directly at my front door. Its tiny green indicator light blinked steadily. I hadn't installed it. Someone had been on my property again, and this time, they wanted me to know it. The psychological warfare was escalating. But so was my resolve. I wasn't leaving, not now. That night, however, was the lowest point in my entire ordeal. I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the irrigation sensor now sealed in an evidence bag on my counter. For the first time, I seriously considered giving up, selling the house, moving somewhere without an HOA, leaving this suburban nightmare behind. The constant vigilance was wearing me down. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I checked my security app dozens of times a day. The knot in my stomach never seemed to loosen every time I spotted Carol's car. A familiar question gnawed at me. Was a rainwater harvesting system really worth all this stress? As if sensing my faltering resolve, my support network mobilized the next morning. Dave showed up with coffee, Linda arrived carrying a basket of homemade muffins, and Jennifer came armed with both her legal expertise and a steely determination that helped steady my nerves. "This isn't just about you anymore," Jennifer said as we gathered around my kitchen table. "Carol's behavior is poisoning this entire community. If we don't stand up to her now, who's next?" Their encouragement shifted my perspective. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started thinking like a strategist. After all, I was a professional designer, accustomed to navigating complex problems and dealing with regulatory obstacles. It was time to bring those skills into play. Our first priority was investigating the strange irrigation sensor I'd found in my garden. Tyler, my neighbor's college-aged son studying computer engineering, offered to examine it safely. In his garage workshop, he carefully opened the device while wearing gloves. "This is definitely not an irrigation sensor," he confirmed, peering inside the casing. "It's a wireless camera with live feed capability. Pretty sophisticated, too. Runs on a small battery and transmits to a receiver within about half a mile." Using some of his specialized equipment, Tyler managed to trace the device's wireless signal. It led directly to an apartment complex on the edge of the neighborhood. A quick check of property records revealed the tenant of Unit 14, none other than Jeremy Whitfield, Carol's son. Armed with this new evidence and a detailed log of the escalating harassment, Jennifer helped me compile a case for the police. Detective Warren, a no-nonsense investigator from the Property Crimes Division, took our information seriously. Harassment, trespassing, vandalism, illegal surveillance. These aren't HOA disputes, he told us during our meeting at the station. This crossed over into criminal territory a while ago. While the legal process played out, I threw myself into making my home as secure as possible. I added more lighting, reinforced every lock, and set up a security protocol Jennifer jokingly said would make a government agency proud. I also, at Jennifer's urging, started seeing a therapist to help manage the gnawing anxiety and relentless vigilance that had become my daily reality. The day police executed their search warrant at Jeremy's apartment marked a definitive turning point. That evening, Detective Warren called me, his voice carrying a note of disbelief I hadn't heard from him before. "Mr. Hayes," he began, We've recovered some troubling items from Jeremy Whitfield's residence. I'd like you to come by the station tomorrow to review what we found." The next morning, in a sterile conference room at the police station, Detective Warren laid out the evidence. There were dozens of photographs of my house, taken at different times of day and from various angles. Detailed notes tracked my daily routine. A collection of damaged parts matched exactly with the components from my vandalized rain tank. But the most disturbing find was a stack of printed copies of my water utility bills, documents that could only have been obtained illegally. Jeremy Whitfield's been surprisingly cooperative since his arrest, Detective Warren explained. He's willing. Jeremy agreed to testify against his mother in exchange for a lighter sentence. What he revealed shattered any lingering doubts about Carol's motives. She hadn't been targeting me randomly. Her actions were part of a calculated scheme tied directly to her political ambitions. Mom's running for city council next year, Jeremy confessed in his recorded statement to the detective. He was obsessed with crafting the perfect neighborhood backdrop for her campaign photos and videos. According to Carol, "My rainwater tank ruined that vision. It made the neighborhood look industrial, not the pristine suburban oasis she was selling." Jeremy admitted to installing surveillance devices, tampering with my water meter, and vandalizing my rain tank, all under Carol's instructions. Even more disturbing, Carol had compiled similar files on 5 other former Sunnyside Estates residents. Each of those homes had features she deemed visually unsuitable for her campaign materials. All those homeowners had either altered their properties to her liking or moved away entirely. The evidence was damning enough for the district attorney to file multiple criminal charges against Carol and Jeremy: harassment, vandalism, criminal trespass, and illegal surveillance. An emergency home meeting was called, and Carol was immediately removed from the board pending the investigation's outcome. Detective Warren showed me the files recovered from Jeremy's computer. My voice remained steady, though disbelief lingered as I addressed the gathered homeowners. "These are detailed spreadsheets tracking when I left for work, when my lights went out at night, even what groceries I brought inside. This goes far beyond harassment." The detective confirmed they found similar files on the other 5 residents, all targeted for the same reasons. Despite the gravity of the evidence, Carol wasn't finished. Even cornered, she had one desperate move left. The judge granted me a restraining order against both Carol and Jeremy 2 days after their arrest, legally barring them from coming within 100 yards of me or my property. Carol, released on bail pending trial, reacted exactly as those who knew her predicted. She doubled down, launching a frantic campaign to salvage her reputation and remaining influence. Using her loyal followers, she spread misinformation throughout the neighborhood, claiming I was part of a radical environmental group trying to sabotage property values, that the police evidence was fabricated, and that the entire situation was a conspiracy to block her city council run. Few bought these increasingly bizarre claims, but tension lingered as the legal process continued. One evening, while walking my dog, a silver sedan pulled alongside me. The driver was an older man who introduced himself as Thomas Whitfield, Carol's ex-husband. "I saw the story in the local paper," he said as we sat on a distant park bench, far from Carol's house. "I wish I could say I was surprised. I left Sunnyside Estates 3 years ago after similar targeting. When we were married, I wanted to install solar panels, but Carol said they'd ruin her image as a traditional values candidate. When I went ahead anyway, she made my life miserable until I finally left." Thomas showed me emails documenting Carol's prior neighborhood manipulations, including plans to mold Sunnyside Estates into the perfect campaign backdrop. He offered to testify about her pattern of behavior if the case went to trial. "She did this in our previous neighborhood too," he added sadly. "It's always about controlling the image, never about the actual community." While the criminal case slowly progressed, Sunnyside Estates underwent remarkable changes. Richard led a comprehensive revision of the HOA bylaws through the Transparency Committee I had joined, somewhat reluctantly at first. We rewrote the rules to balance aesthetics with sustainability, personal freedom, and community well-being. My rainwater collection system, once a source of conflict, became the inspiration for a neighborhood-wide water conservation initiative. The local water utility even featured our community in a public education campaign on drought mitigation strategies. A block party celebrating these new environmental efforts drew nearly every household. Neighbors who had barely spoken months before now collaborated on community gardens and exchanged tips on desert-adapted landscaping. My journey through this conflict transformed me from a conflict-averse newcomer into a community advocate. The skills I developed as a landscape architect, balancing aesthetics and function, navigating regulations, and creating sustainable systems, proved invaluable in leadership. I found myself speaking at city council meetings about progressive home models and water conservation efforts. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carol's harassment had inadvertently propelled me into the very public engagement she sought for herself. Linda and Dave became close friends, not just allies. Jennifer and I started spending time together beyond legal strategy sessions. The shared battle had forged bonds that might never have formed otherwise. 4 months after the arrests, Carol faced the legal consequences. Overwhelmed by evidence, she accepted a plea deal on reduced charges, 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service, ironically assigned to a watershed protection project. Jeremy, having cooperated fully with investigators, entered a diversion program that would clear his record if he completed education and community service requirements. The court ordered Carol to pay substantial restitution to me and other victims identified during the investigation. Perhaps the most fitting justice came when local news extensively covered the harassment scandal, effectively ending Carol's political ambitions. Her obsession with creating the perfect neighborhood for her campaign became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach, featured under headlines like "Picture Perfect Politics Goes Too Far." 6 months after that first confrontation over my rain tank, I stood proudly beside it as a county environmental official presented Sunnyside Estates with an award for community water conservation efforts. The tank, now surrounded by thriving native plants and serving as the centerpiece of an educational display, had become a neighborhood point of pride instead of contention. Carol sold her house shortly after her conviction, moving out of state to escape the humiliation. The new family moving into her former home approached me during their first week, eager to learn about installing their own rainwater collection system. Watching the neighborhood transform from battleground to progressive model filled me with wonder and satisfaction. What began as a simple environmental installation had sparked a complete reimagining of what our community could be. Sometimes, the right thing isn't the easy thing. Standing in my backyard now, watching rain fill the tank that started it all, I realize it was never really about the water. It was about one person trying to use fear and intimidation to control others, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to say, enough. Oh, and if you're wondering what happened to all those fake irrigation sensors with hidden cameras, they're now lining the community garden facing the wall. Of course, a little reminder that in this neighborhood, we watch out for each other now, not watch each other. Thanks for listening to my story. If you faced your own neighborhood Karen, drop your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life drama you just can't make up. Thanks for watching ya stories. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild tales coming your way.